What's up, everybody? Justin Null. I am joined today by a man who really needs no introduction. He is a best-selling author. He is a podcaster. He is a biochemist and a fellow jiu-jitsu addict. Please welcome to the show, the one and only Robb Wolf. Robb, what's up, man? Thanks so much for being here.
Huge honor to be here. Thanks.
So we could jump in and start with the usual thing, like, who is Robb? What does Robb do? What's Robb's favorite book and favorite submission from the guard, right? We could play that game. So I kind of want to just jump into the good stuff because I selfishly want to get your thoughts on so many things. And before we dive in, I just want to give people a bit of a setup for this particular conversation. I just had to reach out to you immediately after these two recent nutrition debates, these back-to-back debates that were on the Joe Rogan podcast. And you were the first person I thought of while listening to these exchanges that were at times for me infuriating. And it's funny because Diana Rogers and I were texting during the debate and after. We were talking about how epic your Instagram was after the Omnivore debate. You're just kind of losing your mind about some of the things that Kahn was saying. And I feel like your beef on the episode was obviously based on the hard science, while my beef with the episode was a bit more about the general public, because I sort of feel like everyone involved in these debates failed the general public.
I actually feel really badly for your viewers and listeners.
No. They're going to be able to go over this with a fine tooth. This is so important. I thank you both for doing this.
And that's just my take on it. And like, I love Kresser's work. His work changed my life back in 2013 when it was still Your Personal Paleo Code when I read it back then, that book that he did.
Right.
But I just feel like as long as we have academics arguing with academics in this kind of pissing contest with an audience of the general public, that's not going to change any of the problems that the country is facing. So I just, for the record, I kind of want to get, what was your take on these episodes?
Man, so, with the Kresser Kahn debate, Chris pinged me maybe 3 months before this thing actually aired because Joe was interested in setting this up. And Chris, being the smart guy that he is, knew that this had the potential to be a excrement-filled disaster. And so, after I did my kind of deconstruction of the movie What the Health, which I spent 60, 70 hours literally going minute by minute, here's the claim, here's what, my take on it. Those guys really wanted to do a debate. And I said, debates are for theater. If we really want to do something, here's what we do. We pick out a couple of topics that we're going to present on, and we get some people to present on those topics. And we could do a coin toss or, however one person goes, they present their view on this topic. And then the next person goes and they present their view on this topic. And then there's an opportunity for each of these folks to basically cross-examine the other and then open this up to a panel, have the panel cross-examine both of these people, and then move forward. Now, next topic. And when I suggested that, and the folks at the Institute for Human Machine Cognition, IHMC out in Florida, they were willing to host this. They were willing to put all this stuff on. And when I threw that out to the folks that did What the Health, they retreated immediately. They wanted nothing to do with that. And so that was the way that I have presented this. National Public Radio wanted myself and a few other folks to debate. John Mackey, CEO of Whole Foods, and John McDougall, and a few other. So it was going to be kind of vegan versus paleo thing. And I laid out that it had to be in this following format. And we could talk about health, ethics, sustainability, but they needed to be discrete entities, and they needed to be discussed in basically a cross-examination kind of format. And the same thing, they pulled the plug on it and they didn't want to do it. And so Chris articulated all this to Joe, and I did too. Like, there were multiple email exchanges, multiple text exchanges. Hey, we really need to have this format. Joe didn't want it to be that like controlled. Like, he didn't feel comfortable with it being that controlled, which he then, in talking to him, he regretted, because he was basically portrayed as being siding with Chris. And so there was a whole bunch of kind of backlash around that. And so he was like, wow, you guys are right. I should have listened to that. we should have, set it up in that format. So, I mean, just the basic format of a quote debate is really, really problematic, because you can't, what I was doing to some degree in my Instagram post was trying to provide that QA/QC process, that quality control thing. Okay, here's the claim. Okay, we have a claim about a metabolic ward study with 100 people and increasing saturated fat correlating with LDL counts. Like there should have been an opportunity to deconstruct all that stuff and get back in and revisit it. And okay, here are the claims. This is what the data supports. And you just couldn't really do that in real time. Like Chris did an amazing job staying on top of that as he could, but Joe was consistently having to reel Kahn back in and get clarification, and he really only asked Chris for clarification on one point, and Chris was like, oh, okay, maybe I misstated that. But it made it very imbalanced, because I would go out on a limb and say that Kahn was being very fast and loose with the facts and kind of doing some logical fallacies in the way he was presenting things. And Joe would call him on those things. So it created a picture that looked like he was very much on Kresser's side, when in fact Joe was just kind of like doing what any good debate moderator would do, which is trying to, keep people within certain lane lines. But, it just made the whole thing appear as if, the world was stacked against the kind of vegan idea. And so it didn't play out well to anybody. Like, I think Joe deeply regretted doing it at all. Chris kind of regretted doing it at all. I think it provided a platform and venue for Kahn to honestly gain a lot more traction and airplay. And one of the problems today is that if people disagree with someone else, then they just try to shut them down entirely instead of having a debate. Even on college campuses, it's like, oh, I don't like that person's politics, so they shouldn't be able to speak. So I think that that's a terribly problematic kind of scenario. But at the same time, having the debate set up in more of almost like a PhD review meets a legal discovery process, which is kind of the way that I had, suggested we do this. There's a lot more, you're going to really think through what you say and what you present if you know that the other side is going to have an hour to go sit down and pick it apart, take notes, do research, and come back and ask you questions on that, and vice versa. Like it's gonna make people be very, very on point with what they are doing. And it was a long time ago, but Gary Taubes and the strength coach, nutrition guy, Alan Aragon, they did a debate like this, and they used a format like this, and it was good because some of the shenanigans on both sides were kind of shaved off. Like I've seen both of these folks present the same material that they presented there, but they presented it in a much more concise and honest way, because the other person had an opportunity to step back and look at what was said and what the claims were, and then, really deconstruct that. So I think going forward, it really doesn't make sense to do just kind of an open format debate like what happened there. And this is why I just absolutely refuse to do these things. If someone agrees to do it in the format that I've laid out, then I'd be more than happy to do that.
Well, the other issue I think is that it's the problem of whether or not you know your audience. So again, when it's academic versus academic, it's like the Joe Rogan podcast, one of the most popular podcasts to ever exist. It probably is the most popular podcast, but that certainly doesn't mean the majority of his listeners are academics. Right. So what happens is when you don't have this panel situation that you're talking about for fact checking, I mean, you have 60% of the standard American diet being refined processed carbs and high fructose corn syrup and damaged oils, like as bad as it gets. And they don't have an understanding at all of biochemistry. And then without those fact checks, you can have like to me, what was the most infuriating line ever spoken on a podcast, that idea of, well, I've cut open this many hearts and I've never scooped sugar out of arteries.
Let's point something out. I've been inside of hearts 15,000 times. I've never scooped sugar out of a blocked artery. I scooped cholesterol out of blocked arteries. 20% of every blockage in a heart is cholesterol.
Chris, you have something to say about that?
Yeah, so that doesn't mean that the cholesterol is there because people were eating it, Joel. You know that.
It could be, though.
And,
Hold on.
Let's look at what the research says again.
Right.
And you're like, oh no, people think that's an accurate statement.
Right.
You know that, and it's meme worthy. It's all these things, and that's what I saw in the comments. I made the mistake of looking at comments, and this was a bully situation. This was 2 versus 1, and Kahn didn't get to speak, and this and that. But again, at the end of the day, we have 100 million diabetics and pre-diabetics, and it's 2 academics arguing over TMAO and glycine and methionine. And I'm like, you might as well be speaking Chinese. You know what I mean? So who's it trying to help? I guess that's my question. Right.
And it's that's a really good that's a good observation and a very good question. And at the end of the day, I don't know that it really helped anybody. It at least set a high or either a high or low water mark for like the way that these things can play out. And so in the future, whether Joe would be willing to tackle this, or like if someone like the IHMC or some other entity wanted to tackle something like this, I think it makes the case for, okay, we really need to do it in this other type of format, or there's just really no point in doing it. Like, it's not going to move the conversation forward at all.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the biggest thing. If there's a silver lining to it, I think it was a huge leap in the right direction of getting the conversation started, if nothing else.